Mike, thanks for doing this. Let me apologize both to you and to people who are watching. I'm in a t-shirt. I'm in a hotel room. I just got to Asheville a little bit ago, but I really wanted to have this conversation because there's so much going on right now. And it's funny, you plan these trips. Like I've been on the road for a couple of weeks, and I'll be back in Arizona in a few more weeks. And all the stuff, everything's happening right now, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I have all the time to be out gone.
Yeah, no kidding. Where do you want to start today?
Well, I think it's really important. I mean, the Middle East, what's happening over there right now, it's just it's incredible. And not that we saw it coming, but it's like one of those things you've seen it coming for a long time now. And I'm just like, okay, all right, when it happens, then let me know. But it's here. We're here. Just like, let me back up a second before you respond.
Yep.
Just like, what's going on in the financial sector, the revaluation of the dollar, where this administration is trying to take us, and we're in that too. So it's like we're not talking about it anymore of like anticipation. We're here. This episode is brought to you by McElvaney Financial Group. Their advisors bring a depth of knowledge and experience that allow them to serve their clientele with care, ensuring their financial needs are met now and in the future. Personally, I'm not saying cash is worthless, but you can see what's happening. It's worth less every year. Gold is the opposite. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to www.mcelvaney.com/coffeeandamike.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're right on the verge of a very dangerous, potentially nuclear escalation that could easily balloon into a world power war. China ordered the evacuation of its own personnel from Tel Aviv. And of course, Trump saying that everybody in Tehran should evacuate. Russia is involved in the back channel diplomacy, no doubt, with Iran. I believe that Russia and China are trying to de-escalate. But of course, Israel wants to escalate to bring in America to fight its wars by bombing Iran. And Michael, I'll make this prediction on your show. There's no question in my mind that Trump has already approved the U.S. Air Force bombing of Iran. And that's going to happen undoubtedly within the next few days, barring some kind of miraculous peace intervention. But I don't see that happening. And the domestic political implications of this are really quite extraordinary. And they should be very worrisome for Trump supporters and the GOP. And here's why. Trump ignored the conclusion of his own director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who said that the conclusion of all the aggregate intelligence services is that Iran does not have nuclear weapons. Trump, in a recent interview, I think he was on an airplane or boarding an airplane, said, well, I don't really listen to Tulsi Gabbard, or she says whatever she wants, but I believe Iran has nuclear weapons. Well, where is he getting that information? He's getting it from Netanyahu. So Trump's DNI is Netanyahu, not Tulsi Gabbard. And that's very concerning for all of us in America because it shows that the Zionist group has taken hold of Trump's consciousness, and they are now feeding him and dictating to him what is, quote, reality. But it's the same playbook from Desert Storm, the Iraq War, all the made-up intelligence about, yellow cake and weapons of mass destruction. It was all fabricated. That's exactly what's happening now. But Trump believes it, and as a result, he has greenlit the bombing, and we're about to be plunged into a scenario that could be very devastating politically for Trump, for MAGA, for the GOP, and devastating to America's economy. So I'm happy to go into more detail in any direction you want.
Well, so I want to start domestically for a second because, and you tell me what your thoughts are, whether you agree or disagree, because it feels like there is a divide right now within MAGA, and I have to tell you, when you look at this, and I'm going to reference COVID probably a lot in this conversation because that was where you really started to see the divide, right? Was it a serious virus? Was it not a serious virus? Masking, not masking, vaccine, not vaccinated, and BLM. And then now you come to this, which is another divider, right? Where you're just cutting the group in half, smaller and smaller and smaller. And I made the mistake of getting in an argument with a boomer, and I don't think all boomers are bad, because I'm going to get a lot of heat for this, but, a guy who's my parents' age, in their 70s, and he's saying, do you want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and then what? They wipe out Israel? That's our only ally in the Middle East. I said, I have heard about this Iran nuclear weapon for over 20 years. 20 years. And it used to be, what was it? A year away or 2 years away. Then it was a year away. Then it was 6 months away. What was it last week? They were like hours away or something?
Yeah, right. And it's all made up. Right.
So, but you have people that are still like grabbing onto this, and it's like, haven't we learned? We watch the same movie over and over and over again. And I don't know what to believe, even as I'm following this right now. But go ahead.
Well, let me give you a metaphor story of this. Suppose you live in a neighborhood. You got neighbors on both sides of you, and you have an AR-15, but you don't like your neighbor on one side, and you don't want him to have an AR-15. So you march over there with your Glock and shoot him in the head and kill him. And then when the police show up, you say it was self-defense. He was about to get an AR-15. And then you steal his house and move into it as buffer space. And then you say, you know what? I think the next neighbor over also might want to have an AR-15. So I better go march over there and kill that neighbor and take their house too. So this is what Israel is doing. If Israel manages to destroy Iran, overthrow it, get regime change, then next they're going after Pakistan, the next Islamic country that's been on their target list going all the way back to George Bush Sr. The target list: Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, et cetera, the whole list. And Israel has managed to get America to fight its wars for it this entire time. But the excuse has always been the same, that we can't let these other countries get these weapons. Well, Michael, what international law allows the U.S. or Israel to dictate to the rest of the world who is allowed to have not just what weapons, but who is allowed to have domestic nuclear power infrastructure? Because what Trump is saying and what Netanyahu is saying to Iran is that you're not allowed to have even any domestic nuclear power at all, not even enrichment at 3% or whatever, which is typically used for power infrastructure. You're not allowed to have that at all. But there is no right under international law for one group of countries to dictate to the other group that they can't have a nuclear power. It would be like saying, well, we forbid you from having solar power, or we forbid you from having coal-fired power plants. And then when you look at the actual behavior of Israel, Israel is routinely assassinating with car bombs, which are acts of terrorism. They say they're going after the nuclear infrastructure in Iran, but they're assassinating military leaders. And the word is they just assassinated the former leader of Iran, Ahmadinejad, and his wife and his two sons. So Israel, of course, assassinated Nasrallah in Lebanon. Israel operates as an assassin's cabal in total violation of international law. So Trump is siding with a very dangerous and dishonest and deceptive regime under Netanyahu, who is himself under criminal investigation in his own country, which is one of the reasons why Netanyahu needs endless wars in order to avoid being prosecuted by his own court system because he's such a criminal. So that's my assessment of the overall situation.
What is Israel's end goal then, in your opinion?
Clearly, their end goal is the Greater Israel Project, which is to take more land, more resources. They always say, well, we had to bomb that country because Hamas might have been hiding there, or there were tunnels, or there were weapons hidden in people's living rooms. So we had to strike those homes in Lebanon, or we had to shoot these Palestinians in the West Bank, or we had to bomb these hospitals in Gaza because under the hospitals there's gremlins or whatever. This is their plan to just keep on expanding. They want Jordan, they want Syria, they want all of Lebanon. They want to go all the way to South Turkey. That's the Greater Israel map. They want part of Egypt. They want all of Iraq. There's no limit to what they want. It's just expansionism its empire. And that's their goal, is just keep slaughtering and murdering and taking, and there's no end to it. And there will never be peace as long as they have the power to keep doing this.
As we look at this now and kind of the building blocks to lead us where we're at, was this the goal with Syria and removing the Assad government? That way the United States at that point had control of their airspace. And now with Syria under this control of, with Syria under United States control, that is another, building block towards this.
Well, yeah, Syria was one of the countries that was always on that target list that Israel wanted to overthrow the government that they did not control. The airspace dominance is just one of the so-called benefits of Western control over Syria. But the other benefit is that Syria represented some of the land routes between Iran and Yemen. So it's well known that Iran provided some weapons to the Houthis in Yemen, and those routes, the land routes, went through Syria. And Lebanon, weapons to Lebanon, weapons to, various forces there, including Hamas, those went through Syria. Now, there are sea routes, obviously, that are a totally separate conversation, to get to Yemen. But it's harder to hide on the ocean, than it is to hide on a bunch of roads.
Have you had Kevork Almasian on your show yet? Have you connected with him?
No.
Syriana analysis on Syriana analysis on YouTube.
Oh, I've seen his channel, but no, I have not had him as a guest. No.
Yeah, he's excellent. I had him and Matt Bracken on together.
All things sounds like a great show.
All things Syria, all things in relation to Syria. I would recommend Kevork. That'd be a fascinating conversation between you two.
Okay, outstanding. I'll look him up. If you'll text me his name or a contact, we'll reach out to him.
Yeah, I'll connect you guys. Then where do you see with this, if Israel is able to accomplish the greater Israel, what will Erdogan and Turkey do?
Well, it's very clear to me that Turkey is going to leave NATO. And it's very clear to me that, look, let me step back. The big battle that all of this represents, I don't remember who said it. It's a Ron Paul type of quote, but all wars are banker wars, right? So this is about BRICS, which is the Eastern countries, versus the West, which is the dollar-denominated half of the planet, or not even half. It's less than half in terms of population. But of course, the Western countries, Western Europe, the United States, predominantly the US and the UK, and then of course Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, Japan, etc. They want to maintain that dollar dominance system because the US can use sanctions as a weapon in order to achieve its political goals, and doing things like cutting off Russia from the SWIFT system, which happened in 2022. Economic sanctions have been leveled against Iran for decades. The East, however, the Eastern countries, which is roughly the BRICS nations, but even beyond that. So of course, we're talking about China and Russia and Iran.
A little bit of a temporary delay, so I apologize for that.
No worries. Do you want me to just restate that answer?
Yeah, if you could, please.
Okay, just in summary, it's East versus West because of control over the currency. And what your audience needs to remember is that China purchases about 30%, I believe, of its oil from Iran. And Iran is a major trading partner and a geographic gateway to Russia. Russia needs to have Iran not join the West. Russia can't afford for Iran to have a regime change, which is what the West wants. And, that's why Israel's been assassinating political leaders. It's not about nuclear power or nuclear weapons. It's about regime change. But neither China nor Russia can tolerate Iran being flipped to the West. And that's why this will very likely escalate. The harder the US and Israel push on Iran with bombs or even additional economic sanctions, the harder or the more rapidly this escalates into a global conflict where Iran becomes the proxy nation the proxy battlefield between East and West. That's my fear of where this is going, because it can go nuclear very rapidly.
Do you think in the initial plan of the United States and Israel, was it for something fast and swift to decapitate the Ayatollah and the upper regime in order to create the chaos similar? Some kind of similar to what Syria, just basically create a civil war within the country like Syria.
Yeah, an attack that just took place. It's now come out that was 8 months in planning on the part of Israel. We also know the UK is involved, the CIA is involved, and one of the clues to that is these domestic, these hybrid drone launch vehicles that Israel had deployed inside Iran, almost identical to the vehicles deployed inside Russia to bomb the Tu-95 long-range strategic bombers on those multiple airfields in Russia. So these are, and in the UK, that's called, what is it? Operation Kill Web or something like that. Something web, but then in Ukraine, they called it Spider Web. So this is a MI6 CIA operation working with Mossad to place these drone attack vehicles inside Iran. And with that, they achieved a level of surprise, and they were trying to disable Iran's response and to carry out a leadership decapitation. Israel did achieve a lot of damage, but they did not topple the leadership of Iran. And Iran sort of recovered and began firing back and raining down missiles on Tel Aviv, to the point where so many Israelis are trying to flee the country, their own country, that Netanyahu announced that no Israelis will be allowed to leave. That was, yesterday or the day before. So in essence, Netanyahu is using Israelis as human shields in his own country. You are a hostage now of Netanyahu. If you're an Israeli in Israel, you're a hostage.
And he's not even there, right? Is he still in Greece?
He's probably in Greece. We never know, but he's using his own people as human shields. Like since October 7th, he used the hostages as the excuse for everything. The hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. It was always the excuse. It was never about the hostages. With Netanyahu, it was never about saving his people, or certainly it's not about saving America. It's about achieving his goals of power and destruction at any cost, any human cost.
Well, and because I had read, was it last week that he was already, once this started over the weekend, that he was already in Greece, that he had left Israel.
Well, that's certainly possible, although he may be flying back and forth depending on who he's meeting with. I think Netanyahu himself is going to remain physically secure. I don't think Iran's going to be able to take him out. But Netanyahu has put Israel on a path of long-term destruction of the nation. I can't even tell you how many people, like Michael Yan, one of your guests, one of our friends, he used to be very strongly pro-Israel. And by default, I was as well. I didn't know. Before October 7th, I didn't know much about the Middle East. I wasn't really paying attention. And the more intelligent people learn about the situation and about the history of Israel, the attack on the USS Liberty, how Israel murdered dozens of U.S. sailors and tried to sink the ship as a false flag to be blamed on Egypt. And they still operate the same today. It's all the same. So more people are waking up to what's happening.
Well, and from this, so many things to unpack with all of it.
Yeah.
So them failing, would it be safe to say that they failed? Obviously, they failed taking out. They took out some scientists, they took out some of the top military brass, but now, Trump was saying that we're negotiating, and once this strategy appears that it backfired, are they pivoting, or do you feel like he's backpedaling from this because it didn't work?
Trump was never negotiating. Now, understand, when Trump says they were negotiating, it's kind of like the way a mugger negotiates with you, puts a gun to your head and says, give me all your money or your life. That's the kind of, quote, negotiation that Trump's people, Witkoff and others, were staging with Iran. It was total surrender. You surrender everything, you give up all your weapons, you allow IAEA inspections, and then we'll let you live. And of course, what happens? If a country agrees to do that, what happens? Well, you could ask Gaddafi, but he was murdered by the West after he tried to appease the West. So he gave up nuclear ambitions and weapons, and look what happened to him. They dragged him through the streets, okay? So what the Eastern world has come to realize, and clearly Iran has realized this, and so has Yemen, is that there is no appeasing the West, because ultimately the West wants your total destruction. In other words, Israel and the United States, they don't want a world where Russia exists. I mean, this was certainly true under Joe Biden, or where Iran exists, or you hear it right now in the Trump administration, where China exists. The ultimate solution by the West is to eradicate these three countries, overthrow them, and install Western puppets, which is what they did in Ukraine. So this is a wake-up moment for the whole world, realizing that you can't really negotiate with the West because the West is not an honest broker, not good faith operators in negotiations. Look at the Minsk Accords that the West violated in Europe. And you can't appease the West unless you agree to commit suicide. So the only thing left to do is for them to fight the West, and that's what they're doing.
So now with this, what is the likelihood that the United States will provide these bunker bombs? Because if they start using these bunker bombs on Iran, I don't know, would it be safe to say game over or a game changer?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, it is a 100% certainty that the U.S. will drop bunker busters on Iran. Okay, so mark my words here, like bookmark this, all of you watching, 100% chance. That's going to happen. When that happens, the risk of escalation then involves Pakistan, Russia, and China and their retaliatory response. There's also, of course, the risk of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran could close very quickly. Did you see there was a ship collision that just took place in the Sea of Oman, just to the south of the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz? They're kind of southeast. So there's already been a ship collision because of some of the GPS jamming that's been taking place there. And those ships are on fire that I last saw, massive oil tankers, or at least one of them is a massive oil tanker. So the Strait of Hormuz, as you know, you've covered this, your guests have talked about it, supplies about 20% of the world's oil and over 30% of the liquid natural gas supply to the world. And this is where, I'm not sure that Trump has thought through this. If he dropped bunker busters on Iran, Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, it sets in motion skyrocketing oil prices. Oil will go to anywhere from $150 to $300 a barrel. Gas will skyrocket overnight. Food inflation domestically in the United States will skyrocket. The supply chain will be severely damaged or obstructed. Fuel costs, going sky high, etc. The American people will become poorer. American businesses will suffer, and the U.S. economy will suffer. But you know who benefits, Michael? It's Russia, one of the largest world exporters of energy. Because with oil at, let's say, 150 a barrel, Russia gets a windfall of billions, if not tens of billions of dollars in profits that Russia can use to fund its war machine and its hypersonic missiles and weapons development, etc. So Trump, by listening to Netanyahu instead of his own base, and by bombing Iran, he's handing a windfall of profits to Russia. Think about that. And destroying or harming the U.S. economy substantially and setting up a massive Democrat win in the midterms. The Democrats on this trajectory, here's another prediction for you. The Democrats on this trajectory, they will sweep into power in the House following the elections next year. And then, of course, they will have the House majority leadership position. They will impeach Trump yet again. And this time, they're going to have maybe 70% of the American people with them on that impeachment, because people will be suffering under the economic damage unleashed by all of this that we're talking about.
How likely would it be that Iran would do this by closing the Strait of Hormuz? Because that's going to, I mean, what's the impact that's going to have on Europe?
Oh, devastating to Europe. Since the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines, of course, carried out by the U.S. Navy, Europe has relied on exports from the Middle East for a lot of their LNG. Shutting down the Strait of Hormuz would cause energy prices to skyrocket even further for Europe and lead to devastating winter conditions where, they're going to be hard pressed in many cities to just have enough heat to prevent all the indoor water pipes from freezing. Europe, I mean, look, Michael Yanis said this before, and I agree with him. Europe's already done. Western Europe, it's finished. Now it's just an unraveling timeline. They were finished. They've been finished for a long time, but some of the pivot points were the Nord Stream pipeline destruction, but also when the European leaders themselves, the woke leaders, they went along with, all the climate change lunacy, and they forbade themselves from tapping into their own energy. So they went anti-energy, and then with Nord Stream cut off, their industry is collapsing. Germany, automobile industry, BASF, glass making plants in France and other countries in a state of absolute collapse, and it's not coming back.
This is such a peculiar time in regards to not knowing what to believe and what not to believe, because even looking at like mainstream headlines, like I looked at the Wall Street Journal yesterday and they were saying like Israel has complete control of the skies. So I was talking to a friend of mine, and it's like, okay, if that's the case, why is Britain sending planes? What do you need those for if you're in control? What do you need additional equipment for in that case? But then you're also like, you look at this, some of the journalists that I follow on X on the Iran side, and it's like, yeah, they're shooting, they're getting through I say Golden Dome because the United States, the Iron Dome, it's a grift.
Dome, yeah.
It's a grift. Everything's a grift, Mike. What do we need a Golden Dome for? Who's firing missiles at us that we need a Golden Dome? But go ahead. Were you gonna say something about that?
Well, no, I mean, but you've hit the critical point. Israel claims to have absolute air dominance, but their Iron Dome doesn't work, and Tel Aviv is getting hammered to the point where half the people in the country are trying to flee. So if you had control over the air, then obviously missiles wouldn't be getting through, right? So, as with everything else, it's Western propaganda, just like NATO propaganda during the war with Russia. The Iron Dome doesn't function, and furthermore, Iran has much more depth in terms of its missile supply and inventory compared to Israel, which is just about to run out of interceptors for its so-called Iron Dome that barely works anyway. So, Iran has managed to overwhelm Israel to the point where, Israel depends on U.S. munitions for a large portion of their so-called Iron Dome. The Patriot missiles and the THAAD, so-called THAAD missiles, et cetera, the high-altitude interceptors. Those are just about gone. And because the U.S. itself has suffered an industrial collapse, you could say, or maybe a recalibration over the last 20 years, the U.S. can't even produce enough missiles to replenish Israel at anywhere near the rate that they would need in order to stop the incoming missiles from Iran, even if the interceptors worked. So the outlook for Israel is not good here. Israel can keep on pounding. Iran can keep on pounding Israel, and that's why Israel is probably going to take this to the next step, which will be a fusion bomb, a neutron bomb, or a nuclear bomb on Iran, and then that will take us to World War III. That's where this is headed.
How long do you anticipate this can go on for where we're at now, this back and forth, before it moves to a different place?
Weeks at most, I would guess. Weeks at most. And remember Michael Yon's 3 rules of war. All wars grow unpredictably, and all wars last longer than you think. And those 3 rules are going to prove true right here. So this is not going to be over in 2025. This is not going to be over probably in 2026. Unless somehow Israel backs off which seems highly unlikely. This is going to continue through the entire Trump administration. And that's why you see online, you see memes of Trump's face morphing into Bush. Have you seen those?
I haven't seen him yet. No.
Yeah, they're all over my feed for whatever reason. I was actually correcting people. I said, no, Trump isn't Bush. Trump is McCain. He's becoming John McCain. Just this neocon warmonger, right? Unless Trump and Israel back down from that and seek a diplomatic solution, which seems impossible when you murder the negotiators on the other side, which is what Israel does, and they just did. Hey, let's negotiate, and then you murder the negotiators and their family members, etc. Who's going to negotiate with you? Nobody. So this isn't going to be over for years. Most likely, that's where this goes.
Oh, you think it gets dragged out to? I mean, we're talking another Iraq, another Afghanistan.
Oh yeah, this will outlast Trump's occupying the White House. Yeah, and this will probably end the Trump presidency because this is going to go very badly in ways that Trump and Israel cannot anticipate. Again, you can't just bomb a country and expect them to surrender. History has shown that aerial bombardment only enhances the determination of the people to resist whoever is bombing them. Aerial bombardment does not result in regime change.
How much support, MAGA support, do you think Trump has lost in the last week and a half?
I think Trump is losing at least 50% of the MAGA base right now. Now they could come back if Trump backs off of this war with Iran. But if he proceeds, I think Trump will lose 70% of MAGA. I think this will be the end of MAGA, actually, if Trump proceeds. And understand that I don't want to see that happen. And I don't say this with any sense of glee or anything. I want to see Trump succeed with America first. And I strongly urge Trump to listen to Tucker Carlson, listen to Steve Bannon, listen to people like Owen Schroyer or Michael Yon or many of your other guests or Matt Bracken. Listen to these people. Don't drag us into another war with Iran because it's going to be the Vietnam of the Middle East, and it's going to drag out for years at enormous economic, political, and also a human cost. Almost certainly.
Can you believe where we're at right now with all this? I mean, we've been talking about it, and here we are. It's unbelievable, Mike.
Well, I agree with you, but I do believe it because look at what Catherine Austin Fitts has been talking about. Solari. There's a financial collapse that is inescapable. There's been too much debt for too long. It's not sustainable. Trump and the people around him, they know that there's going to be a financial reset sooner or later. They need a cover story for it. They've always needed a cover story. And that cover story is, hey, we're in a massive war with world powers. The bigger the war, the bigger the cover up, right? Then when everybody loses all their bank accounts and the dollar is destroyed with more money printing and people lose their pensions and everything, then Trump can point, oh, it's Russia or it's China. Wasn't us, wasn't all of our spending and currency printing and all the fraud and everything that happened under Democrats and Republicans alike. And I'm not throwing all this blame on Trump. He inherited these massive problems that have been going on for generations, right? But war is a cover story for the reset. And war explains away why everybody loses everything, except those who own like gold and Bitcoin, for example.
Yeah,
they're going to be okay.
And it comes back to that conversation I had with Matt. I've had a few conversations with Matt Smith, in regards to what he was talking about, the devaluation of the dollar, what Besant and Lutnick have been talking about. And, this is the Great Reset. Trump is ushering in the Great Reset. And I've said we're in WEF 2.0 with these tech people. And that's why he got reelected again, in my opinion. But the question I have for you is, let me share with you my thoughts, and you tell me if you agree or disagree. Because as we've spent time talking about the Middle East, I've always felt this divide that they've created, or not always felt, but I've been feeling with this divide that they've created, this is an opportunity for them to use more of these instruments to lock us down. More digital control, and I thought the events from last weekend was a perfect beta test because they were able to organize 1,400 plus protests across the country, and nothing really was minimal what happened. I think there was some gunfire at Salt Lake City, and you saw L.A., but that was to me eye-opening because they don't have enough law enforcement, military personnel to cover the amount of protests like that to that size. So now, all right, we need digital, we need Palantir, we need more technology to be able to manage all this and get ahead of it. That's where I think this is all going, Mike.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I would say that I would characterize what you just said as an interim step to the longer term goal, which is depopulation. So the greater goal spanning the next decade or what have you is massive human depopulation, because they've got robotic, autonomous systems that are very capable, that are being scaled up in production year after year to replace the vast majority of human labor. And then they have cognitive AI systems now that can replace most of the human cognition tasks. And in fact, it's the cognitive tasks that will be replaced first by AI. So as you know, I'm building an AI engine. We're just days away from releasing it free to the public at Brighteon.ai. It's non-commercial, completely free, no fee, no advertising, nothing. And it's about to be released. And in building this, I came to realize that at least 70% of cognitive jobs are already obsolete right now. And with the rise of agentic AI, that's only going to accelerate to 80 or 90% of basically desk jobs. And that's why even Elon Musk wanted to really automate much of the federal government. You could fire 90% of the federal workers in, let's say, regulatory agencies like the FDA or the EPA, and you could replace them. You could replace like 20 workers with one computer system, and it would do a better job, and it would complain less also, and it wouldn't collect a pension, et cetera, right? So that realization is already out there. Then the rise of robotic AI systems is going to replace many of the humans. But here's a critical point that a lot of people don't understand. The bottleneck for the manufacture of robots at scale is the actuators. The actuators, these are the motors that are in the joints, like the elbow joint, the shoulder joints, whatever, all the different joints. All of these actuators use neodymium magnets, or some people say neodymium. Neodymium, a rare earth that is predominantly mined and produced by China. So if China cuts off the United States from neodymium, you're not going to be able to build robots. Now, Ford, the automobile company, last week announced that they had to shutter their production lines temporarily because they ran out of what? Neodymium magnets from China. And the temporary trade deal that Trump struck with China to temporarily lower tariffs was contingent upon China granting export licenses to certain U.S. companies that are favored by Trump, companies that import what? Neodymium magnets. You see where I'm going with this? So the West can't build robots. Tesla can't build robots. Google, whoever, none of them can build robots at scale without China and China's rare earths. And China can withhold those, and they have withheld them at any time they want strategically. So where this is actually going is that China's going to build the AI robot armies first, and the robot drones and the robot walkers, the land robots, the exploding kamikaze squirrels, I call them. China's going to have those first, and they're going to borrow from the West in using 40-foot shipping containers that, open up and out crawls like 5,000 kamikaze squirrels that are Chinese-made robots with explosive charges on them, out of the port of LA, or drones fly out just like we saw out of Ukraine. China's going to be able to do mass production of robot armies that will just overwhelm and overpower anything that the U.S. can come up with.
That's the spice right now, right? Energy. When I was in Virginia last week, I happened to meet a guy who is an electrical engineer, and he does the data centers, and he was saying they can't hire people fast enough. Amazon is pumping in $20 billion in the state of Pennsylvania, more data centers. They're opening up everywhere, and not everywhere, but where there's fiber optics. He explained, and this is where I think people don't really understand. Like, this didn't just start happening in November with the new administration. So then it begs me to ask the question, right? Like, when I heard this, does the president really even have control of things, or is it just somebody sitting in the chair?
I mean, he's got some control, obviously, but it's minimal. Look, my concern is that Trump, even if he has the best intentions and good faith towards America, which seems to me like he's actually putting Israel first at the moment. But
let me interrupt you,
Trump
Mike. Mike, let me interrupt you a second.
Yeah.
Do you still think he is putting the good faith? Because I've gotten to a point where people have said Trump's got to walk a fine line. I said, you know what? I'm not giving him a pass on any of this anymore. This is on his watch. This Middle East war is on his watch. Russia-Ukraine at this point, I think it's fair to say, is his war.
Well, at this point it is. I mean, look, he campaigned on ending wars and not starting wars. I mean, we could play video clips of him promising this, right? People voted for him because they wanted to end the wars, especially war with Russia. And they certainly didn't want to get involved in a new war in the Middle East. So since then, what has Trump done? He has sent more money and weapons to Ukraine, more money and weapons to Israel, and is now poised to bomb Iran on behalf of Israel. And that is certain to happen, probably within the next few days. So yeah, Trump absolutely betrayed his MAGA base on this, and there's a political price to pay for that. But where I wanted to go with this, even beyond this, is that the United States of America has sort of worn out its welcome on the world stage in terms of currency printing, currency manipulation, and running around the world just bullying every other country and demanding absolute surrender, which is what Trump's demanding of Iran right now. That worked post-World War II, when the United States Navy was the dominant navy that could patrol the seas, that could bomb anybody, anywhere, at any time, and when US dollar sanctions could destroy a nation. But US dollar sanctions that were inflicted or heightened against Russia in 2022 didn't destroy Russia, even though we were told they would. They actually made Russia stronger, and they made Russia's domestic manufacturing stronger. So it actually forced Russian wealthy people to invest in their own country. So now Russia has the infrastructure to produce 20 times more military output in terms of weapons and munitions than all of NATO combined, including the United States, the UK, Germany, all of it. How did that happen? Well, the capital stayed in domestically. They built infrastructure domestically. Russia's not afraid of Western sanctions. Iran's not afraid of Western sanctions. And ultimately, China isn't afraid of Western sanctions either, because China has the industrial base that we once had in World War II, but we gave it up. And instead of making tanks and airplanes and physical goods, America exports debt that nobody wants anymore. China's selling off our treasuries. Japan, which has its own financial problems, is selling off our treasuries. Who's buying our debt? Nobody, except, the Federal Reserve printing money to buy our own debt, like a snake eating its own tail. That's not sustainable. So the whole world is watching and realizing the U.S. is actually setting itself on fire economically. And that's why there hasn't been an attempt by China or Russia or even Iran to accelerate war. The accelerationists are Israel and the United States. That's why you have all the warmongers and the neocons screaming for the U.S. to attack China, which would be a suicide run, because the West is what's dying. The West is desperate because this is the waning chapter of the history of Western empires. We're living through the last chapter.
Do you think because this is the last chapter, and that's why their focus will be to lock us down again, put more digital control into place, so there's no dissidence?
There's a very good chance that once we get into a declared war in the Middle East, that Trump will push extreme censorship in the United States. They will seize domain names. They will demand that people get pulled down from platforms like X. And all this censorship will be put in place as stopping anti-Semitism. So when the left wants censorship and control over the narrative, they say it's anti-hate, or that we're stopping misinformation or disinformation. When the right wants to engage in censorship, they say we're stopping anti-Semitism. It's the same censorship, just different labels.
Well, and I think COVID showed us, right? People follow. They follow. They don't want to lead. And I think people would willingly follow again in the right. They won't fall for COVID. People push back at me. They're like, well, they'll never fall for COVID again. I'm not saying that. But the right scenario, something similar to this or something like this, I think people would willingly comply again.
Well, look at George Bush's ratings after 9/11. It's like 90% popular support. And of course, all kinds of questions about 9/11 that we don't even have time to get into here. But it's clear to me that that event was allowed to take place in order to shape popular American support for war in the Middle East. I mean, this is actually the same thing happening again. And that's why, I meant to say this earlier, there's a very high risk, very high risk of false flag operations. The USS Nimitz is obviously a target for a false flag, but also U.S. military bases in the region. There are over 50,000 U.S. troops at various bases around the region, Kuwait, Iraq, other areas. All those bases are within range of Iran, but all those bases are also within range of Israeli bombing runs with their fighter jets or bombers, or fighter jets carrying bombs, or even cruise missiles, etc. They can bomb a U.S. base. They can produce casualties of 1,000 U.S. servicemen and women, and then the media can just say, well, Iran did it. And most Americans will believe it, regardless of the facts. I mean, Benghazi, right? I mean, just look at the history of all the lies that have been carried out by previous administrations and involving people like Hillary Clinton and so on. All the lies, most Americans just bought it hook, line, and sinker. The same is going to happen again.
Yeah, I don't think the average consumer has gotten any smarter from. But I think people want to be told what to do. That's what our country is now.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard to go against the grain. It's hard to be an independent thinker, and it's so much easier to go with the flow and just join the tribe and just rah 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 for war. The problem is this is almost certainly the last war ever that the United States will start, because the United States of America as we know it will cease to exist before this war ends, is my guess.
What do you envision then? In a new world, what do you envision the United States?
Well, a lot of scenarios, some of them involve currency collapse and then a breaking up of the United States into the disunited regions. Other scenarios involve secession. There are strong secessionary movements right now on the left. Obviously, the No Kings protests and things like that. California, run by Newsom and others who are actively talking about not paying federal taxes. And then when Biden was in office, Texas was talking. There's a lot of conversation about Texas secession. So domestically, the U.S. culture and political outlook is very much fractured and not sustainable. I mean, you have half the country that wants to keep millions, tens of millions of illegals in the country, and the other half of the country that wants them to be deported. Well, that's not reconcilable, those two halves. At some point, they're going to separate. But then on the world stage, you have really the approaching end of the U.S. dollar as the global hegemonic currency. And this is just part of history. For your listeners, it's not crazy to say that nations rise and fall or that currencies come and go. I mean, you can look at, the history of currency, the British pound sterling, or in Portuguese currency, French currencies, ancient Rome, ancient Egypt. Currencies rise and fall, empires rise and fall, and they do so in many ways in a pretty easily trackable manner. The fourth turning and all of that. And we are clearly in the last stages. You can see it with the total insanity that's on parade every day in our country, like the fact that our soldiers on the 250th Army anniversary, they couldn't even march in a uniform fashion. I mean, it looked like a high school play. The Russians must be laughing their asses off. And then you have, the naval officers that are largely obese. You're just sitting at desks all day, getting fat, eating jelly donuts. And there are military leaders, and not to mention the ones under the Biden administration that were men pretending to be women, wearing pantyhose and high heels with a chest full of medals and a push-up bra. And it was a total clown show. And, that's what the Pentagon has become.
Where do you see then, I know I'm running out of time here with you, but where do you see then Russia-Ukraine as it's simultaneously happening with the Middle East escalating?
There's no doubt in my mind that the war in the Middle East is going to take precedence, and we've already seen Ukraine shipping weapons to Israel. So there's a demand within the U.S. military leadership to deny weapons to Ukraine, to give preference to Israel. So in other words, the U.S. is about to tell Ukraine, you're basically on your own. And even if Zelensky refuses to negotiate, Russia has already decided it's not worth even attempting to negotiate with the West, because the West cannot negotiate in good faith on anything. Not any agreement, not any ceasefire. I mean, Trump just admitted his whole thing with Iran, that he was saying, we want peace, we want to negotiate. It was all just a fake out to try to catch Iran by surprise, and it worked. That Trump was colluding with Israel the entire time. And then Israel murdered the negotiators. So Trump just destroyed any credibility of the U.S. being in any negotiation. I mean, think about it. Michael, what country would negotiate with the U.S. knowing what I just said? Would China negotiate with the U.S. on wartime issues? No. Would Russia? Nope. So Russia's just going to keep pounding, and Russia's going to take, over time, slowly and methodically, as much territory as it wants, which will probably be everything east of the Dnieper River, but not Western Ukraine, but it will include Odessa. So my prediction is Russia takes Odessa, but it's many months away.
Are you surprised that, Putin, the slow walk that's still occurring with all this? Do you feel like it's a slow walk?
Yeah. I'm not surprised. No, actually, this is entirely consistent with Putin's personality, that Putin is not prone to overreacting. He's methodical. He's like the chess master of battle. Putin knows that in a war of attrition, Russia wins. And every month, Russia is recruiting about half as many soldiers as the U.S. recruits in an entire year. And of course, it takes time for those new recruits to be trained and to get battlefield experience. They can be rotated into frontline battle, etc. Putin is very smartly building the world's most experienced and largest ground force military, combined with advanced exotic technology such as the Oreshnik missile systems, which no Western country can stop, and other hypersonic missiles such as the Kinzhal, which no Western country can stop. I think this is entirely consistent with Putin's personality, and I think it's going to continue for years to come.
It's not in a positive way, but what Israel has done, in terms of, what they've done to Gaza and then the pagers, for them to intercept the supply chain and do what they did and the damage they caused in Lebanon and decapitating Hezbollah, it is unbelievable. And I asked myself, is this the modern day warfare?
Well,
and then before you answer that, with President Trump and this appearance that he's negotiating with Iran, and then all of a sudden, missiles start flying.
Right. So, art of war, Censorship, deception, setting up the battlefield before the battle even begins. Israel is very good at that. Mossad is very capable at explosives, whether they are planting explosives in pagers or in Building 7. They're very good at planting explosives. They're very good at car bombs, assassinations, blowing people up. But those acts alone do not win wars. And they don't stop incoming missiles from Iran striking targets in Tel Aviv, as the Israelis are finding out. And they also, they cannot work against Russia or China. And so that's where this is headed, that they are meeting up. Israel's push is colliding with the far more powerful global interests of Russia and China. And that's where all of this stops. You can play shenanigans with North African states like Libya, or you can threaten Egypt or buy them off, which is the current state of affairs. But you can't actually topple Russia with pager bombs or Mossad intelligence. Mossad does not have penetration of Russia's intelligence services, nor China's. They're able to do it in the Middle East because of locality and ethnicity, et cetera, but not so much these other countries. And I don't see, to step back for a moment, Michael, I don't see Trump doing what would be necessary for America to be able to compete with China in the long run. China dominates in almost every one of these 65 key technologies that determine the future of human civilization and economic and scientific dominance. China dominates almost all of them, and that includes minerals extraction, includes robotics, it includes like cyber warfare, material science, all kinds of things. And they're also gaining on AI language models and probably super intelligence or AGI or ASI. I don't see Trump doing the things that would be necessary for America to graduate more STEM graduates, science and technology graduates. Our schools are still dumbed down largely. Our universities are still woke festivals for the most part. Unless that changes, America will never be competitive long-term against the technological dominance of China and the military tech dominance of Russia. And frankly, India is gaining ground in that area as well. And given that China's population is about 1.3 billion, many times larger than the United States, China and the natural intrinsic ethnic intelligence potential of the Chinese people, who are among the sharpest on the planet just right out of the gate, just genetically, they're very, very smart people. And that's true across all, Koreans and Japanese and Thai and Taiwanese as well. Asian people are ethnically very intelligent. That's why the California school system had to punish you for being Asian, because they kept getting all the university slots, getting the high scores on everything. But I don't see Trump rolling out a plan to compete with China. Trump's plan, and frankly, the plan of the neocons, is just to kneecap all the other nations of the world that might compete with us, not to actually compete with them. That's not going to work long term. That's what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I took so long to say that.
No. And I want to end with this last statement and get your response on it. Is that is my biggest fear, because with intimidation and the bullying that it appears that is going on, it reminds me of any of the dissidents in this country, and again, coming back to the No King's protest and whatnot, they want to strong arm anybody who is going to speak out against this, and they're going to use that opportunity to lock us down and just debank us and deplatform us and use the First Amendment and and I think people will willingly comply.
Yeah, at first, a lot of people will comply. This is why the answer is decentralization. And that's a concept that I teach repeatedly. To decentralize your life And in terms of finances, that means to have your assets reflected in things that governments cannot counterfeit. So if you're holding dollars, you'll lose all the value. You'll be wiped out. If you're holding Bitcoin or gold or silver or land, things that governments cannot counterfeit, then you'll do okay, actually. In terms of speech, you got to decentralize. So you got to go to alternative platforms, alternative channels like yours, and Substack is a good choice right now. Of course, I've got Brighteon.social, and we also have Brighteon.io, which is a blockchain-powered decentralized platform that doesn't even have central servers. It can't be taken down, doesn't even rely on domain names. So there are many, many alternatives. There's Telegram, right? There's private messaging. It's going to be impossible for Trump to really clamp down entirely on speech, although they could seize domain names and they could ban people's accounts in a time of war, just like they did in Ukraine. Remember, in Ukraine, Zelensky's term expired over a year ago. They have banned elections and they've banned all independent media. And if you say anything against the regime, you can be assassinated or imprisoned. And that was a model for what they plan to do in America, I believe.
Well, and that's what, we're moving into centralized government, centralized healthcare, centralized law enforcement agencies. And I think that, people are like, well, there's no solution, no solution. As an individual, you have to ask yourself, okay, if they start to do things, if they make it more difficult for you as an individual to fly, then you say to yourself, all right, I just won't fly then. All right, I don't need this then. I won't buy this. I won't do this, this, or this. And that's the best way as an individual, in my opinion, you can manage this, having that non-attachment. But what do I know, Mike? The only one listening to me is you right now, so I don't know anything.
Yeah, you do. You're very wise. The decentralization strategies are key. And we have to disengage from the control grid systems, which is happening. It's accelerating, actually. Think about it right now. Because of COVID, more people are skeptical of a war in the Middle East because people don't trust the institutions. And people don't trust, the FBI. People don't trust the FDA. People don't trust the CDC. And that's why you're hearing so many vocal, outcries to say, hey, what happened to Bongino and Patel at the FBI? Where are the arrests? Where are the Epstein files? How come they haven't banned the mRNA jabs at HHS? What's happening? The reason you're seeing all that outcry is because people are getting informed and red-pilled, and that process will accelerate.
Where can people find you, Mike?
Well, they can follow me at naturalnews.com, or Brighteon.com is our video platform where you are free to speak your mind, whether I agree with you or not. You can post videos on Brighteon. We have live streaming there as well. And, Mike, you're welcome to post on all our platforms as well, and, including Brighteon Social. And we're just going to keep the platforms alive for freedom of speech, no matter what happens.
And your X handle as well? People want to follow you on X?
Health Ranger.
Mike, as always, I enjoy our conversations. Thank you for everything you're doing. Thanks for making time to speak with me. And I know it won't be too long before we chat again.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me on. I always enjoy it.
Mic drop.